Hey folks, Lee Colan and Julie Davis-Colan here. Thanks so much for showing up and being so prompt. We appreciate you guys. We're excited to have you here today for just a little bit of a session on taking positive action, ways to build a positive mindset in an uncertain time. We really just appreciate your time. We know it can be a busy time. We hope for most of you. For some of us, we have some extra time. But either way, our time is very valuable, and thanks so much for being here. Again, I'm Lee Colan, my partner, Julie Davis-Colan, in life and in business and in authorship and everything. We'll be partnering to deliver this to you today. We've started our firm over 21 years ago. It's called the L Group, and we're all about leadership at every level. We believe leadership's an inside job, so it starts from personal leadership, then team leadership, and then organizational leadership. And so today we want to focus on the mindset, which is really about personal leadership, because regardless of all the skills and all the tips and new technologies we might have at our disposal for this new situation that we're in, many of us working from home, if not all of us, and just juggling lots of things and stuff. Even though we have all those things at our disposal, that's great. Zoom calls, terrific, wonderful. But the real challenge is kind of the mindset we bring to the table, and that's no different than any other day in our life. But it's really kind of shine a light on it now, particularly as the novelty of this situation wears off and we maybe feel this sense of sameness, right, Jules? So we kind of want to really kind of help you guys with just some real practical tips on how you can take action to build a positive mindset. So I'm going to ask you to, if you have questions, we're going to try to get to all your questions. Please use the Q&A box. It'll be a lot easier. The text box just comes flying through with lots of stuff. So please use the Q&A. If we cannot get to any of your questions, we promise we'll commit to answer them within 72 hours of this call. We committed to 48 hours on our last webinar, and we got a lot of questions, so we were really hustling. So bear with us. In just a few days, we'll get back to you, and we'll give you all our contact information at the end. You'll get a nice set of notes and stuff and a challenge after this. And so if you want to reach out to us individually with specific questions, maybe more personal or something, we're happy to give you as in-depth of an answer as we possibly can, okay? So again, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. We're going to just jump in right now. Before we do, let me just frame this a little bit. Julie has her master's degree in preventive medicine. We met at undergraduate. And then she also is one of 1,200 people, only one of 1,200 certified worldwide as a positive psychology practitioner. So she understands the biology and the psychology, the medicine, the science and the psychology of high performance, the science and the psychology of creating a positive mindset. So I'm thrilled to be able to kind of partner with her on this today. I'm going to chime in. We're going to kind of go back and forth, but Julie's going to go ahead and kick it off first and talk a little bit about just kind of a little bit of context around some background around this. We're going to really try to give a little bit of some things that you could think, say, and do throughout this, but all practical tips about how you could kind of your thoughts, your words, and your actions. So I'll just kick it off to Julie here, and we'll kind of bounce it back and forth, okay?
Okay. Lee was gracious to give my background, but I'll also give his. He's an organizational psychologist, so our blending of topics and content really works well. So if I might, I'm going to take you back a little bit to 1999. And I'm going to ask you to think about a gentleman that might be similar to yourself, or a woman at this point, who might be a little grumpy at this point with your children if you have them around. I don't know if any of you have had those moments. I have, where like, Mom, you're grouchy. But at this time in 1999, I'm going to take you back to a rose garden. And there was a little girl who was gardening with her dad, and she was saying, Daddy, do you remember when I was 3 or 4? And he said, yes, love. And she said, do you remember when I used to be very whiny? He said, yes, love. And she said, well, Dad, when I was 5, I decided I wasn't going to be whiny anymore. And if I can decide not to be whiny, then can't you decide not to be grumpy? That was a conversation between an individual, a psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman, and his daughter. And in 1999, Martin was the president of the American Psychological Association. And he had one of those light bulb moments, a time when he realized psychology up until that point had really been studying getting to neutral. And he just became conscious of the fact that we really didn't have a collective study using science of how to go north of neutral. So at that point, he put that agenda of positive psychology on the psychological agenda. Now, there are many pockets studying this in silos prior to that, but this gave a common umbrella in which people would bring science of psychology, medicine and such together to learn from. So I'm going to talk a little bit, if I can, about the anatomy of the brain. And don't worry, it's not a big, deep lesson, but I just want to talk about some things that we know about this. When I grew up, everyone always said, oh, you know, when you get older, you start to lose you're not as sharp, you start to lose memory and things like that. And those are assumptions that science held true until fairly recently. We know now that our brain is what is called neuroplastic. It has an ability to regenerate. And what's regenerating is we have 100 billion neurons. Those are cells within your brain that are connected, each connected to about 10,000 other neurons. So we have this very elaborate neural network in our brain. And what we know is that thoughts that fire together wire together. In between these neurons, if I might, there's a space, and that space is called a synapse. And when we have a thought, it makes, if I might, a bridge over to the other neurons. The more we have that thought, the stronger the bridge. If those thoughts dissipate, then that bridge starts to weaken and go away. That is kind of the fabric, if I might, of neuroplasticity. So because our brain is flexible, because it can grow and regenerate, we're going to talk today about some techniques to help it grow and be your best for yourself and other people as you go forward. I want to talk a little bit, however, before we start into the details of that, about a bias that we have in our brain, and it's called the negativity bias. Our brain has a natural bias toward negativity, and boy, we don't have to go far for negativity right now in the news and such. And the reason that is, it's just from an evolutionary perspective. As at one point, at any one time, there could be a saber-toothed tiger running behind us, and we had to figure out how to stay alive. That neural networking of caution was a life-saving technique at one point. Now we're faced with an invisible enemy, if I might, the coronavirus, and it brings up some of these negativity feelings and makes them even stronger. So we're going to talk a little bit how to deal with those. And Lee, you want to talk a little bit about how to neutralize that negativity?
Sure, absolutely. Some research out of the Gallup organization years ago found that the most productive work groups have at least a 5-to-1 ratio. I'm sorry, 3-to-1. Got ahead of myself. 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. So it's a great way in terms of, like, when you think about working with your team or your family, that what happens, you might be thinking, well, why 3-to-1? And because the fact is that the negative feels stronger than the positive feels. You've seen this in marketing and your business probably. You know, one bad review on Yelp, you need 10 or 20 positive reviews to counteract that. And if you ask people to recount significant moments in their lives, they tend to recount the negative moments and actually talk about them in more detail. We have this negative bias that just Julie mentioned. So we need to counteract that to make sure we're providing more positive, disproportionately more positive interactions than negative interactions with our work groups. And so that might be, you know, telling someone they're doing a good job, or taking someone to lunch, or writing them a note, or just asking them, like, how's it going? How can I help you? Those are all positive interactions. Now, the interesting part of that study is it found that on the home front, the most effective marriages had at least a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. So even more important to keep in mind now, as we're probably spending more time with our loved ones at home and our spouses, that even though we can maybe get on each other's nerves, we need to make sure that we're kind of keeping a good ratio of positive to negative interactions. And this is just a simple way of appreciating people, appreciating who they are, right? And people might, sometimes leaders will say to me, well, Lee, I don't want my team to get soft. I don't want to go 4 or 5-to-1. I'll just stick to 3-to-1. And here's the great news. Mm-hmm. We've never found in all of our research, never, anyone, nada, ever, that has ever felt overappreciated, right? Isn't that great? So, you know, if you want to go the distance, as long as it's sincere and meaningful, find ways to appreciate people, find ways to create positive interactions with them so that we can get the best from ourselves, and the best of others, okay?
So when we think about our thoughts, I'd like to say, first of all, that this whole area of positive psychology is not about never having a negative thought. In fact, we have about 50,000 thoughts a day, and some of those are going to be negative. The whole idea of positive psychology is working with the negative and increasing the positivity. So thinking of our personal thought ratio, if I might. So when you think about thoughts, I'm going to talk to you about things you can think. Interesting side note, you can think about thinking at the age of 9. I think that's interesting. It creates some interesting conversations at the dinner table, because some of your kids are actually probably studying this in school. So it might be something you're learning on your homeschooling if you have children at home as well. When you think about a mindset and choosing positivity, the key word there is choice. And if I might, I'm going to start with a quote from Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor and also a psychiatrist. The quote is, "Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance, to choose one's own way." He understood after going through that horrific experience that people could do anything to him, but he still had a choice between his ears. He could choose what to think. And the beautiful thing about that is so can we. Back when I think Lee and I met back in psychology class many moons ago, we studied, and many of you probably did as well, or have heard of, Pavlov, and they studied the dog who would have a bell ring, we'd ring a bell, give him food, and he would salivate. There was a stimulus, and then he would respond a certain way. The beautiful thing about being a human is we don't have to behave like an animal. We have a stimulus, and then we have this big area of choice, and then we can respond. We call them emergency response teams, not emergency reaction teams, for a reason. We don't want to react, we want to respond. So some of these techniques that I'm going to share are actually going to help you take control of that space and make choices to go toward positivity. In doing that, I'm going to share another construct, and this actually comes from Stephen Covey back in the 80s, my actual favorite book back then, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to use my prop as an empty tissue holder, toilet paper holder. Many of you have these now. But this represents what I'm going to call the circle of influence. I also like to call this the circle of control, the things in our life that we can actually influence personally. Concurrently, there's something out there called the circle of concern. All these big things about the coronavirus in China and other states and other cities and things that everyone else is doing. The attempt that we want to make, and the effort is to focus as much on the things that we can control and expand this circle to be as big as we can against this one. The more we focus on what we can control, the more we're making a choice in between that stimulus and response. So that's a mental construct to think about what is it within my purview that I can actually control. Another way to put it, back in the Olympics, a gentleman was covering the rowing event. And he kept interviewing people, trying to find some very interesting things to write about. And he would ask the rowers, well, what do you think about all the waves and what happens with the wind? All of these things outside their control. And the Olympians said, we don't worry about that. We only worry about what's inside our boat, what we can control. And that's just another analogy of this circle of influence versus circle of control.
And that was good old, I think, Charlie Jones back in the Olympics in Atlanta had that. Thank you, Julie. One more, again, we're talking about things you could think, say, and do. So one more thing about thinking, just a simple model, is called the Broaden and Build theory by Barbara Fredrickson. And it basically says that negative emotions tend to restrict our ability to see options and solutions. So if you could imagine a time that you've been totally stressed out and overwhelmed, you know that feeling. It's almost like you could see your periphery kind of going in like this, and it's hard for us to kind of see all the solutions. We feel like there's no way out, right? The reverse of that finding is that positive emotions tend to broaden our possibilities, broaden our ability to see things. So when we're feeling stressed, a little bit off kilter, a little bit unbalanced, like we might right now, it's important for us to kind of push out that negative emotion, and sometimes it means just step away and breathe, step away from the situation, breathe. We'll talk about more specific things you do around that later. But then also just to kind of step away and broaden our view, literally our view, but then also our mental view to see, okay, there are some solutions here. I could chip away at this. I could start doing this. I could take control over this, back to focusing on the circle of influence versus the circle of concern, right? So the broaden and build theory, it's really important to understand that positive emotions really put us at our best thinking and capabilities, and negative emotions tend to start restricting our natural problem solving and thinking capabilities. So
in addition to broadening the perspective that we see and the possible solutions, positivity has been shown to increase our immune system, has all sorts of consumer positive effects, increase our income, innumerable physical and mental benefits. So the science is strong there. The other beautiful thing is positive emotions are the most likely emotion to accompany sustained behavior change. So if you want to make any kind of a change, this mindset becomes fertile ground to help you succeed in doing those. So in thinking about those, I'm going to take you to what we say. And much of this you will say out loud, and if you'll go with me, and then some of it is actually are things we say to ourselves. The first I'm going to say, you have to name it to tame it. Some of the emotions we feel, we just don't even know what they are. So if we can understand what they are, we can actually work with them more. And there are a couple ways to do that. Many of you might journal, which is a great idea. Some of you might have what we call a best team, buddies that ensure success and truth. Someone within a group who you can just say, I just need to vent. And they don't try to actually solve the problem, but just a buddy within that group who can just say, hey, what is it that you're feeling? Okay, and getting that emotion out is the most critical thing. We say that negative emotions don't go away, they just rear their head in uglier ways. So you want to get it out. You could write a letter that you never send just to express that emotion, write a journal, whatever you need to do on that. But it is important to get those emotions out. And I say never, ever, ever write an email in an emotional time, because that is not the time when your brain is thinking clearly. An interesting little side note is an emotion is a physical reaction of only 90 seconds. 90 short seconds. And I don't know how, if you've ever been all wound up, it surely doesn't feel like 90 seconds. But it's actually the recurring thought that keeps on happening when you don't deal with it that makes it stronger and stronger in that bridge. So
we ruminate on it. Yeah.
It feels big.
Yeah.
The next is, I'm going to have you, if you would, do a little thinking with me. So no matter what you do right now, no matter what, I do not want you to think of a pink elephant. Do not think of a pink elephant. Do not think of a pink elephant, no matter what.
Now, we know this really isn't fair because Julie's wearing a pink top on right now. The point's still well taken.
But I want you to not think of a pink elephant, not a pink tulip. In doing that, I know a number of you are thinking of a pink elephant particularly. Why is that? Because I just told you not to. And that is because it's not impossible, but it is unlikely that our brain processes the word not. It has a really hard time. So if I tell you do not think of something, your brain takes it as an affirmative. It just pulls not out of that sentence. It says, think of a pink elephant. Well, think of the application of that to yourself. I don't want to go to the refrigerator again for a snack, between 12 and 2. I want to wait for dinner. Instead of saying what you don't want, say what you do want. This works great with families, with kids, even employees. People remember what you do want. So instead of don't touch, I don't know if you've ever remember even when you were a child when it said don't touch, or someone said don't touch. All you wanted to do was touch it. So I always like the phrase, so put it in the affirmative, touch with your eyes, as another perspective on that. So not is a very powerful word. One other set of powerful words is also, it's a 3-letter word, but I wanted to introduce you to the concept of having to do things. Right now, oh my, we have to do so many things. We have to stay in, we have to potentially wear a mask, wear gloves, stand 6 feet apart, et cetera, et cetera. We're being told we have to do something. We have to stay home. I want you to please take that have to, and for a moment, just think of one thing that you have to do, and it might be a chore or it might be a work project or what have you, and substitute that, if you would, with the words get to. I get to. Let's just say it's a work task that you dislike tremendously. The word, changing that word get to out from have to helps you realize some appreciation for the fact I do have a job. I am staying busy. My brain is engaged. I'm able to earn a livelihood. And if not, if maybe you've lost your position and maybe you're, just staying home. Well, and then thinking, I get to stay home. I'm actually sheltering at home in a sheltered place versus not having that. So it kind of changes the piece of gratitude for that. Sure. So Lee, you want to talk a little bit about strengths?
Yep, I would love to. It's interesting, if you think about that English language, 62% of the words in the English language are negative words, only 38% are positive words. And our research tells us that's not too dissimilar to other languages also, but particularly in English, it's 62% negative. So it tells us that we have to be very intentional in the words that we choose, because at our disposal, there's already a negative bias of, okay, these words are already negative here. So like, I've got to be really intentional about choosing positive words. And so as we think about that and we're working with our teams and our families, it's really important to focus on strengths versus weaknesses. In fact, a research study out of the Korn Ferry Institute found that strengths-based coaching, in other words, focus on here are your gifts, here are your strengths, let's focus on that, yielded a 36% improvement in performance. Whereas weakness-based coaching, you know, the traditional performance appraisal form that says, what are some things this person has to improve on? If we focus on that, it yielded a 26% decrease. So here's our midline: focus on strengths, 36% improvement in performance; focus on weakness, 20% decrease in performance.
26.
26, I'm sorry, decrease in performance. So that's a massive gap we just created simply by choosing our words, choosing to focus on things that are positive and effective with somebody, and helping them continue to nurture those strengths. So we talk a lot about this, and our latest book is called The Power of Positive Coaching. And we do a lot of the research around this to kind of show how just positive coaching is kind of science-based. It's not just being the nice guy or the nice boss. It's about how do you use science to make sure that you're using the positivity to get the most out of your employees. So just a little bit there. So think about that, not just with your employees, but certainly at home with your kids now, or your spouse. Focusing on their strengths and their gifts is going to yield a better outcome for both parties.
I'm going to take that one step further, not just with others, but thinking about that for yourself. We reinforce that which gets reinforced gets done. And so we're thinking, and what Lee was talking about is all about others, but I want you to also turn the mirror toward yourself and think about what are your strengths, what are your gifts, and what do you do well? And then how do you reinforce those? And as a truism, I actually practice this. And if you see me out in public in Dallas, Texas sometime, you might see me going, "Good job, Jules." Because I literally will reinforce positive thinking that I'm having, or positive action. Or when I've made a shift from I have to go do this to I get to. And you can do a silent one, you can do whatever you want. But I've actually seen families and work teams doing that, and it delights me because you're reinforcing yourself. What gets reinforced gets done. So think about your own mindset. It is really important to reinforce that as we go forward. We know the words we say to ourselves are the most important. If we talk to ourselves like we do a best friend, we might not have any friends. So be kind to yourself, think about your strengths, talk yourself up, and go forth in that as it goes to words.
Cool, great. So we've talked a little bit about things you could think, things you could say, and now we're going to focus most of the remaining time on things that you can do. So just a few things we'll touch on. Think about self-care is basically healthcare. So you guys, we've all been on planes, not lately, but you know how the flight attendant will say, put your face mask, not your face mask, your oxygen mask on playing football, your oxygen mask on first. We need to take care of ourselves first. If you think of one of the primary needs here, we're going to talk about 6 or 7 of these, but a fundamental need we have as humans is the need for belonging. And we're hearing a lot of this with our clients now. It's like, yeah, it was great. It was kind of neat to kind of be able to work at home. I always had this vision of all that flexibility. But now I'm like, this is kind of like lonely, right? And the fact is we were made to be, we're social beings. We were made to be around people. Julie told me the other day, she's like, Lee, there's a we in wellness and an I in illness. And so I don't know if that's science behind that, but you get the point. We need to be around each other to kind of be at our best socially, emotionally, psychologically. And listen, solitary confinement is a harsh punishment for prisoners for a reason, right? It's not natural for us. So our sense of belonging is really critical. In fact, I think I have a stat here about chronic isolation can be as large of a risk factor for morbidity as cigarette smoking. Yeah. So I mean, just isolation has that much of an impact. So this is that connection between the brain and the heart and the body, right? So we really need to feel connected. So this is the time to make sure that you have a best team. We call it your best team. BEST, buddies who encourage success and truth, right? BEST, buddies who encourage success and truth. It might be a group from work, it might be outside of work, it might be some from former colleagues. 2 or 3 or 4 people you get together with on a regular basis, or someone that you feel comfortable picking up the phone and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm not at work anymore in the workplace, and I usually kind of can validate this with my colleagues, but I can't hear, what do you think? Or I've got this tough situation I'm going into. Make sure these are friends that are willing to build you up. We always say the definition of a friend is someone that's willing to tell you what you really don't want to hear, but they tell it to you to build you up, not to break you down, right? So don't forget the T on this. Buddies who encourage success and truth. The truth is critical in this. So make sure you're leaning on your best team. It might be family members, it might be friends, colleagues, whoever. And also make sure you're staying connected. This is the time to kind of raise your hand and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm not used to kind of all this kind of flexibility and this sameness being at home, and I'm struggling, or I've got to juggle kids, or my father-in-law just moved in with us, whatever it might be. And then by the same token, we want to make sure we're reaching out to people. This is the time when you say, how are you doing? We really need to mean that, right? In one of our books called Passionate Performance, we talk about how the most engaging leaders look beyond the employee to the person first to really meet those needs. And that's no more important than it is right now. So look at your colleagues or your team members and really understand and inquire with genuine interest. How are you doing? What are you juggling with right now? What are you struggling with right now? And how can I help? And Julie's great about this. Whenever she has a thought about someone who's in need, she just picks up the phone and calls them, or she finds that there's a need, she just does something about it. So I'd really encourage you to be more like Julie there. I need to be more like Julie in that regard, is to really take action when you see a need right now. This is not the time to go, oh, I'm busy, or they'll just take someone else to take care of it. People we don't have as much access and connectedness to those resources and those support networks now. So if you identify a need, help someone meet that need now and take action on it. It could be something as simple as going old school and writing a little note to them, or saying, hey, I'm going to call you every morning for the next week and just kind of check in, or sending some flowers to the house. Just any small gesture, doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Just a small gesture makes a huge difference in someone's life when they're really in need, to know that someone's really reaching out and thinking about me. So I know it goes both ways. We all have needs too, but if we could all reach out and see other people's needs, I think we make the world a better place, particularly in the current situation.
One of the physical equivalents to loneliness is actually putting your hand in a bucket of ice water. So to me, that creates like a visceral reaction. Like, that's how it feels to be lonely. So the more connectedness, the better on that. Another key strategy that we don't often think about is novelty. Believe it or not, even as much as people say, oh, I like to be comfortable, I like to do the same thing. One of the reasons it's challenging now is that we actually are wired for novelty. We like to seek out new things. So I just challenge you to think like a child. Think about how you can make this environment that you're in now fun. Be productive at work, but how do you also entertain yourself? How do you entertain the entire group that might be in the same space with you? I know, as an unusual one, my middle daughter has requested a Blue Man Group performance. So we just obtained from Amazon the blue paint, and I'm gonna be learning some things about the Blue Man Group to perform. It sounds wacky, and when you're 5, you might say, oh, they're Blue Man Group, but you have to think like a child. Seek new things. There's so much content out there for free. This is an example of it now. If you've always wanted to learn Spanish, or you thought, I want to learn the drums, you don't need to actually have drums. You can practice here. Did you want to learn to paint? You want to read something you've never had time to? Create a novelty goal during this time to kind of refresh and invigorate your mind as well.
Cool, great. And on a similar note of novelty, going to the physical part, though, is to make sure that we're moving. My daughter was on a call the other day, a conference call. It's a 4-hour call. And she was sitting there, she's getting so antsy. She works for Procter & Gamble, so she's on this call, very serious. And like, you're on the call, you really can't move, like the camera's on you. She didn't want to like move and stretch out. But she was like, Dad, I would never, like in a regular meeting, if it was a 4-hour meeting, we would have a break, or they'd say, hey, stand up and stretch if you need to, take a bio break, whatever it might be. So I think it's really important now. We don't even like get up to the car or walk up the stairs to go to our office anymore. So it's particularly important to make sure that we're incorporating movement into our day. The research will tell us that probably every 45, 50 minutes, we ought to get up and move. If we're looking at a computer, divert our gaze away from the computer for a couple of minutes and then come back. And at minimum, every 90 minutes. I know you feel like sometimes you get in a groove, I'm cranking. but at least every 90 minutes, preferably every 45 or 50, get up, move, change your environment for a minute. And I know it feels like, well, I'm losing productive time. You're actually becoming more productive, all right? So this is where kind of less is more, right? So you're getting sharper, you're letting your brain kind of rejuvenate a little bit and letting your body kind of move and get some blood flowing. That all serves you well in your ultimate productivity. So be thinking about that.
I was just going to add, if you can, like, incorporate a regular activity of exercise each day,
Yep.
at least 5 days a week, 30 to 60 minutes, for good health, whether we're stationed at home or not, a real critical piece for that as well.
Yep.
And you can choose, there's so many free apps now and free downloads from health clubs, from Orange Theory. That's our personal 7 o'clock class. Guided by one of my children that we have, but there's so many different things out there that even if you're staying inside and not going out, that you have as a choice. Walking meetings would be another one. If you have a call and it's not a video call,
right.
Can you take a walk while you're having that meeting and actually get some movement in? Just kind of practical tips.
Good examples. Yeah, very good. So another thing is to just simply breathe. If we could change our breathing, we literally change our life. I don't know about you, but I don't know how many times I've been like on a roll, cranking, and I'll stop and think, oh my gosh, I don't think I've even breathed for like 5 minutes. I clearly know I have, but like probably very shallow. But so we're thinking about like just breathing. So if you think about kind of lengthening the inhaling of our breathing, kind of activates our system, gets us prepared, because our body needs oxygen, right? And so funny how sometimes we just think about, oh, we breathe, what's the problem? If you really are intentional about your breathing, it makes a huge difference. Everybody right now, just for a second, taking a deep breath for a few seconds, so that activates our system. And then as we relieve the breath over 3 to 5 seconds, then we kind of get the relaxation response, right? So just make sure we're intentional about that. And I think we could do that particularly in the morning if you have some kind of quiet, meditation or prayer time. It's a great time to kind of just wash everything away, just breathe a little bit and kind of get in touch with our breathing, but just get that oxygen. When your body gets used to that, it feels good. And so you'll know if you start kind of taking shorter breaths, you'll feel it quicker. But I really have to kind of get used to that. I'm not great about it, I'll be honest with you. But breathing is huge. I know it seems so obvious, but really makes a big difference, particularly when you're home and you're a little bit more more sedentary than we normally are.
So I want to focus a little bit just for a second on other people. And that is, and I think talk a little bit about acts of kindness. Lee talked about reaching out and all of that. And I'm going to just expand on that a little bit, whether you're reaching out to a nursing home or what have you. Going back to our brain there, what we call mirror neurons in our brain. And when you do something good for someone else, you not only feel good because you did it, when they reflect their happiness, it's like a mirror, it reflects back on you. So we know we're getting a 2-for-1 special. We're doing it we're getting a benefit ourselves. Most importantly, we're intending to do it for other people. So I just want to suggest as one tip, think of random acts of kindness. It doesn't even have to be outside your household. You can have someone inside your household who said, oh, I would like to have this, or, just hide a little note somewhere. Any act of kindness, again, increases that positivity. And the more you do, the more positive that you will feel. Again, just like the ratio, there's no limit. There's no cap where if I do that, I'm going to feel bad. In addition to that, we talked about prayer and meditation. And right now, as many of you are home, you're seeing probably a multitude of apps come up or free offers to just learn how, if you've not meditated before, take your prayer time and actually make it a distinct time in the morning. You want to talk about Lexi's spot that you had?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. When we first moved into our house, our daughter first got her own room. And so she created this little space with a big furry white carpet and a pink chair. And she called it her chillax zone, where she could chill and relax. And I thought, well, I need to chill and relax. I need my own chillax zone. But it was a great reminder to me that I needed to have a space where I could find every day. And you need that same space, whether it's a nice chair in your house with a nice view, sitting out on your patio. It might be while you're taking a walk, but somewhere during the day where you can kind of just chill and relax and reflect a little bit, pray, meditate, but kind of wash your brain. Julie when she talks about sleep, sometimes it's the equivalent of when you sleep, you kind of go through like a car wash. It kind of, the sleep kind of restores your brain just like a car wash would. And so it's the same thing. We're kind of reflecting and meditating. So find a spot where you can create a rhythm in your day where you can, at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, I tend to think I like it personally at the beginning, where you can just start your day. How did yesterday go? What do I want to improve? What do I want to achieve today? What am I grateful for? I use like a gratitude journal. So whatever it might be, but find your chillax zone and make it kind of your little sacred space for just a few minutes a day. I think you'll find that kind of very rejuvenating time.
So on to gratitude, this kind of is linked to that get to. And there's an activity, I'll give you 2 challenges today. One of them is a gratitude challenge. And you probably heard back in the day, Oprah would always say, I have a gratitude journal and write down 3 things that went well. And we know scientifically that there's a version of that that not only has an impact immediately, but can have an impact after doing it for 2 weeks that lasts 6 months. So it's pretty substantial. So what I'd like you to do is think each day for 2 weeks about 3 things that you're grateful for. Okay, that sounds like what Oprah told us to do. Yes. And please, for each of those 3 things, write down what your role was in that. An example, my son came home from New York on Good Friday. I was grateful for that. What was my role in that? I scheduled the plane flight and paid for the ticket. So you don't have to be like instrumental in it. I was in the planning phase. But for each one of your 3 pieces of gratitude, write that, what your role was in it for 2 weeks. And again, science will show the lift in positivity can last for 6 months. So that's a pretty good payback on that.
For sure.
As we wrap up that, I'm going to just piggyback on one thing that Lee said about sleep and the car wash. It just as a target number, 7.5 hours, not that there's any perfect number for everyone, but physically that seems to be a good number for restorative physical and mental health. It's really when your mind and your body are in repair state. And some of you may have grown up, and I certainly put this on myself. I thought less sleep is better. I'm more productive. I prided myself on getting 4 to 5 hours sleep. Now I'm just trying to get longer sleep, because we know that although you might be awake more hours if you sleep less, there are really important restorative benefits to sleep. Couple other suggestions. One would be food. Just make, again, intentionality is the thread that runs through all this. Be thoughtful. I know we can grow in many ways. It just doesn't have to be our waistline during this time when we're staying home. So just be thoughtful. Many of you might pursue different eating patterns based on your own lifestyle. You might do keto, you might do Mediterranean, whole foods, what have you. But just be intentional as you had been before about this. And if you weren't before, just take this as an opportunity to be thoughtful about that. One last item I want to talk about is actually laughter. And the benefits of laughter. Many of you probably experience a physical release of laughter. It's a relaxing response once you have great laughter, but it's a physical and emotional need for laughter. So one of the other things I'm going to put out there as a challenge before we answer any questions, if we have any, is a laughter challenge. So I'd like you to think of 3 funny things that occurred each day for 7 days. And like the gratitude challenge, this is shown to have a 1 to multi-month benefit for just writing it down for 7 days. So I like these power punches where you don't have to sign up for life. Yeah. You can sign up for a short period of time and have an enhanced state of being for a longer period of time. So I put that challenge out there as well for the laughter challenge.
Great, good. Thank you, Julie. So we've talked a few things about what you could do to think, say, and do to kind of build a positive mindset. And I want to reinforce something Julie said earlier, that having a positive mindset is not about, not having anything negative. But we call them ANTs, automatic negative thoughts. Those will happen. The key is not to kind of do a double whammy, go, oh man, I had a negative thought, so I'm gonna beat myself up over it. It's just, how do we rewire the brain back to that neuroplasticity? How do we replace that with a positive thought, a positive expectation, right? And start creating that mental habit. That's all it is. So I don't want it to sound like Pollyanna, like, oh, positivity. It's really just about how do we use the tools in an intentional way, which Julie underscored, to make sure that we're building this positive mindset that we have and managing the negativity that's in our life. It's not about not acknowledging that it's there, right? That's all we're trying to do. So before we wrap up, we have a question from Stacy. Oh, Stacy, the name of the book was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Man's Search for Meaning, yes. It's a classic book and just very, very, very impactful. So thanks for asking that. Patrick, you've been very active here. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the web chat here. Let's see what we have here. I'll follow up with you on some of these. Oh my gosh, Patrick, I think you should have been here making this presentation. You've got all kinds of insights. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So anyway, we'd like to invite you to, we're gonna send you, each of you, an individual email with a follow-up that has kind of some tools. It has a variety of other free tools. It'll have a free download of a parenting book to kind of help enrich your relationships now with your kids. If you have kids at home, we'll have stuff for your leadership, a variety of free tools, but specifically some notes on our discussion today, along with the appreciation challenge that Julie charged you with. As a follow-up. We'd invite you to go to our site if you want. There's a tab there that says free tools at thelgroup.com. If you want to just sign up, most of you probably registered through our newsletter already, but if you haven't, you can just type in the word leadership to 444-999, just text leadership to 444-999. That'll get you there too. So we're here to serve you. So if you have questions, additional questions, there's one more here from what's the research source you mentioned for the neural networking? I think that's massive amounts, isn't it?
Yeah, there are many. And the actual tool, the instrument that shows the networking is called an fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imagery. And that is really, I could link to some resources, but that actually can show how your thoughts and such run through the brain. And that's been a key piece of the puzzle and kind of unlocking how that neuroplastic network is pulled together.
Cool. We'll follow up with specifics on that. So again, we'll just want to thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it. We know it's valuable. We're here for you and with you. We know we'll all get through this together, but I firmly believe, we both firmly believe it starts, the game of life is one of the 6 inches between our ears. So if we start with the right mindset, everything else tends to flow from that. So thanks again for your time. God bless, folks. Take good care.
Thank you.